I'm just saying that I actually think preaching the gospel is is better than political involvement. I think it's better. I think it's more effective. I think it's
Yeah.
actually I think it actually would have stopped Hitler.
Mm.
So I'm talking about a more effective tool. Yeah, Bonhoeffer was quite impressive. First of all, the acting was quite good. You don't tend to see this good of acting in like a faith-based uh
Mm.
genre. And I think they really cared too about the the subject. Like the filmmakers really cared about Bonhoeffer's life, I think, and what he was really about. I think
So
they did.
what was it about? What's the movie about?
Well, it is about Bonhoeffer's life, but because they start out with his childhood in the beginning, and then later on I mean, spoiler alert, he doesn't make it out. I mean, that's kind of his life is that the Nazis kill him. But he is a Lutheran minister who was, born in Germany, he's full on German, but throughout his life, he's seeking God through ministry, and he just keeps discovering that his nation is kind of being lost as it comes to the church. So that he's finding a disconnect in his church. And but they seem to couch a lot of his change in perspective of ministry in his experience in America. So he comes to America, and I think he discovers kind of like a great church in New York, discovers also racism in America. And so because this great church I think a Black Baptist church. And so he loves the music. He plays piano. So this is one way he relates, right? Is through jazz and also just seeing a different kind of church community. And so he gets a lot of joy out of this, and I think learns a lot. And he seems to describe that as real community and real, like, what churches should really be doing. It but the big difference that I was seeing between his church in Germany and the church in America, as it comes to what the film showed, is that just the one in America was more loving. Like that just seemed to me the big difference, is that the one in America was just more loving. Um, I'm not sure if maybe I didn't get the message I was supposed to get from the film there, but I couldn't see, like, I mean, unless they're talking about kind of some social justice, which had to do with the racial experience he had there, where one of his friends got not attacked by a racist, but kind of attacked by a racist. And so he got to see that firsthand. And I think but to me, that's a matter of love, really. So either you're loving your church members or you're not. And either you're experiencing love in the world and you're dealing with it properly as a Christian, which is to love your enemies, or you're not. So, you know, um, which I find is the real hypocrisy today when we talk about racism, is that people are taught now to hate their enemies, so not to love their enemies. And I don't believe that they would be preaching hating your enemies back then. Um, so my guess is that they tried to relate it to today, and so they didn't show them necessarily loving their enemies in the film that much. But I think that they probably should have. But this is the central issue, isn't it, with Bonhoeffer, is that he isn't necessarily a love your enemies kind of guy, right? He's not necessarily, because the lesson that Bonhoeffer is really teaching is that sometimes you have to stand up against terrible rulers, and that the church in Germany wasn't really doing this. I think, when I first learned about Bonhoeffer, I was kind of like, well, surely as a German Christian, being that he's fairly well known, the big lesson would be how to keep the church holy and unspotted by the world in the midst of, terrible political upheaval. And then I learned a little bit more about Bonhoeffer, and I realized it was more about him, his political involvement, and whether he was going to be politically involved or not. And that he felt like he had to be eventually politically involved and even become an enemy combatant, so to speak, against Nazism. And then he made this a part of his faith. So I think because he's very well known and kind of famous in this way, I guess you could say he's some people would think of him as a conscientious objector, but I think that has more to do with like pacifism, right? And in a way, he was turning from a pacifist to a non-pacifist. So he's almost like challenging all pacifists to be like, should you be maybe you shouldn't be pacifist. And so I take a lot of issue with this personally. And my belief is that God's kingdom is a spiritual kingdom and that we are supposed to love our enemies and that our way out of difficult political situations is not to sink to their level and engage in enemy combatant behavior or to become political. I really don't think that that's our solution. I don't think that we're supposed to follow in the footsteps of these political actors. Frankly, I think the problem with, I mean, this is some of the good things that he, I think, talked about was the fact that you live in a community and you have to protect and care for that community. And so he's right about that, right? And but he looked at it like, well, then that means I have to defend my community. And it's true that you have to do that, but you also have to understand there's lots of different ways you can defend your community. You don't have
Yeah.
to defend it in this way or that way. You can defend it in other ways.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm not saying that I'm personally a pacifist at all, but what I am saying is that Jesus does teach you to love your enemies. He
Yeah.
does teach you to turn the other cheek. And he does teach you also that the gospel is the answer to a lot of these problems. It isn't some political solution, nor is it just civil authority. So the true problem with the German church, to me, was the fact that that's what they skimped on. They were skimping on the true gospel. They weren't
Mm.
skimping on some kind of political power or an ability to wield political power. Um, in fact, that's kind of the problem that they had, which is that they kept gaming the system politically, except they were on supposedly the wrong side, right? And so, like, the question then when you're in politics is well, what's the right side? What's the wrong side? You don't want to be on the wrong side. Well, the right side is not about politics as a Christian. It's about Christian. It's about Christ. It's about being with Christ. I really do love that the story really seemed to accurately tell his story and really made him kind of a man who is struggling with his faith and struggling with his like his expression of true Christianity. Um, I'm sure the man was a Christian. Like I'm not saying he was like a bad person, he wasn't a Christian, etc. I'm just saying that I actually think preaching the gospel is is better than political involvement. I think it's better. I think it's more effective. I think
Yeah.
it's actually I think it actually would have stopped Hitler.
Mm.
So I'm talking about a more effective tool,
Yeah.
right? And so loving your neighbor and the gospel, it's obviously about loving the Jews. You can't not make it about loving the Jews.
Yeah.
Obviously you do. Jesus was
Mm.
a Jew. That was a lot of the problem in Germany at the time is that whitewashing the scripture, changing the scripture, and saying that Jesus wasn't a Jew somehow. They were just falsifying all this stuff. And they were trying to get rid of the Jewishness of the gospel. Obviously, you can't do that as a Christian, but that has nothing to do with politics. Nothing. So, you all you do is care about the truth. That's it. You just care
Yeah.
about the truth. You care about the truth of the gospel. You love your neighbors. You love, including the Jews and Germans and English and everybody else. You love everybody else, you know? And so, like, this message is revolutionary. It cuts across national boundaries and national identity and sex and race and all these things, which, of course, part of that is the fact that we only have one race. It's the human race. That kind of solves that problem, doesn't it? We're
Mhm.
actually just one race, you know? And Nazism and communism, a lot of that, the belief system there comes from evolution, which is that we're all different races. They're
Mhm.
actually racists. The
Mhm.
evolutionary science leads you to racism because that's what it believes in, because it believes that we came from different kinds of apes or whatever around the world. It's silly. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. But that's the theory, right? And they're going on this theory, and this theory leads men to do terrible things. We've seen it in history. But now that we have more science on this, by the way, and we're able to trace people's lineage better, they're able to see that we're all related. But people are just ignoring this data. They're just ignoring it. You know, there's places you can go on YouTube now. I think it's called something Genesis something, and they talk about this. This is strong science they're doing.
Answers in Genesis.
Answers in Genesis. Yes, they're one of these groups, and they talk about that matter very clearly. This just
Yeah.
flies in the face of all this evolutionary data.
Yeah.
You can't fudge that stuff when you actually look into it. You can't fudge all your DNA and all that stuff. It's ridiculous. So all of us all came from Adam and Eve, and but what are you going to see before that in the genealogical data is actually coming from Noah, right? Because that's Bible says we were in a worldwide flood. So we actually came from Noah, right? And then before Noah, it was Adam. So this is not that weird if you look at the data,
Yeah.
you know? So we're all in the same race, and we have no right to just treat each other this badly anyway, even if we were of different races. We have no right to do that. So
So,
this is not political. This is all just the gospel. This is all just what the Bible teaches us.
so I didn't see Bonhoeffer, but I saw the trailer.
Hmm.
And in the trailer, they appear to have Bonhoeffer looking at some old film or some film of the victims of concentration camps.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the most like heartbreaking images I've ever seen. Like it's really heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
I think the the Bonhoeffer story or part of the story, the film anyways, is that he becomes involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, which is interesting because he also happens to be a pastor, a Christian pastor.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it seems this is how Angel's marketing it. Like he's a pastor and he's a hitman.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
I find that mildly disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do
I
as well.
agree.
Yeah. I think as pastors, we're called to be men of peace. I'm not saying I'm a pastor. I'm just saying as a Christian, I feel the same calling. But I think that as pastors, we're called to be men of peace. We're called to have a higher calling, right? Than just some kind of physical struggle. No, this is a spiritual struggle. And
Yeah.
this is far more powerful than some physical struggle. So, why put down your strong weapons for some small piddly tool? That just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that you should never, like, let's say I'm not saying, like, let's say a pastor should never go to war or something or sign up. If World War II comes along and you're an American pastor or something, I mean, maybe if you're a young pastor, especially, think about doing that because they're going to need men on the battlefront. But like, and as a pastor, you probably could be in a more administrative place and could rally people to do the right thing in war. But like, I am saying also though that don't reduce all these things to the physical. War is not just a physical matter. And if you look into Nazism, it was a very dark spiritual matter. They did not just hate Jews, they hated God. Similarly to Karl Marx, right? They hated Christianity. Um, and they wanted to reduce everything to the physical.
Hmm.
They believed that they were greater, like, biologically than other people. And this was part of their belief system about nationalism and things like this. It was about their race. And so when you reduce everything to these terms, people become meat. They're no longer something to be dignified,
Hmm.
right? To be respected and loved and appreciated. They're things to just use like a cog in a wheel. We're just going to use you. This is what communism and fascism does to people. It reduces everybody to, are you going to be paid by the state and taken care of by the state? Because why? Because you're just a physical thing. You really shouldn't have a choice to act outside the state. You really shouldn't have a choice to become a spiritual Christian or whatever. No, you're just a resource to be kind of like ground up into meat for the state to use. So in their mind, the higher calling, right, is that the state does something great and forms this utopia, right? And so individual people get left behind, and the human being is not really respected as the image of God. Last week we talked about the image of God, right?
Hmm.
And how important it is to respect the living image of God and treat each other with love and kindness. Wash Christ's feet, and that really means you're taking care of the body of Christ, right? The church. And so communism and fascism just reduces people to numbers. Why didn't they put numbers on the Jews' arms? There, that's another way to dehumanize people. They could have just as easily put their name on there. Well, what's your name? That's not hard. No, it was purposeful to reduce them to something subhuman.
Yeah.
This is what propaganda does too, because propaganda is a message that you're supposed to agree with. And if you don't agree with it, then there's something wrong with you. It's coercive by nature, right? People, they don't want you to think for yourself or disagree. If
Yeah.
you disagree, then there's something wrong with you. So, right. And you have to be shuttled off and put off in another group so that you can be put into like a car and sent to Auschwitz. I mean, sure, maybe you might be lucky and survive it, but you might not be. And who judges that? But the cold, hard state. There's no like, you know, they think that they're their own God and they can do this to people. So they dehumanize the image of God, right? So I mean, goodness. Bonhoeffer's a great film though. Even though I disagree with Bonhoeffer's theology, and I think he should have stayed away from Germany, frankly, at that point. Um there's other ways you could fight. He could have become an English, you know, combatant or something against. He had contacts in America and England. He could have been accomplished even more. Like the point is, I don't know that, and I just think that the philosophy that is taught about him is not the greatest in my view. I don't think it's the most useful or spirit-filled message. I think honestly, you can't be held responsible for the entire German uh, church. Bonhoeffer can't be responsible for the entire German church. He should, and he was acting like he was,
Mm,
and he acted like he had to be really punished for that. And I think that's why he stayed in Germany. He felt he bore some responsibility for all of that, and I think he was wrong about that. I think you have to absolve yourself to some degree for the things that the collective did without your approval. And
mm,
he was among a handful of preachers who actually did preach against it.
yeah.
So, at that point, it's like, what can you do when people aren't listening to you? They're just going to throw you in prison. And then how can you preach and help then when you're in prison? I mean, you can. I'm not saying that this might not have been God's actual purpose for Bonhoeffer to do what he did. Um, but I can't know that, right? But personally, I don't think the philosophy that he's preaching, though, as a result of that, is a good idea. I don't I don't think the solution is political or again being reducing it to physical war. I don't think that's a good idea. And part of Marxism is to reduce everything to a dialectic in which you have just the right and the left wing, and they just battle it out. And if you don't join the right or the left wing, then you're out of the picture, and your voice is useless. And and this is all just a big lie. Of course, your voice is meaningful. God gave you your voice. It's not only within the halls of politics that you have power. It's silly. It stops believing in the power of the spiritual and the power of God. Instead, it believes in the halls of political solutions instead. Which is kind of a false religion when you think about it. So the church can't has to stop believing in the false religion. It has to put all that aside and say, I don't care about political power. Instead, what I care, if I can have influence in political power, it's to convert others away from that system, right? To convert others so that they're not harming people through that unfair system. And that's my belief. I mean, obviously there's a lot of nuance here and it depends on a lot of things. And I'm not whatsoever saying Christians shouldn't be in the government whatsoever. In fact, I mean, almost the opposite, you know. But when you're talking about the kind of warfare that they're talking about, the dehumanizing effects of that, it's terrible. I did like Bonhoeffer though. It's a great film and it's definitely worth watching. Definitely worth watching. It's on the Angel